Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Ethics Across the Curriculum and the Yard Workshop 2021. I'm Jeff McCrease. I'm the Deputy Director of the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership, and this workshop is a joint collaboration between the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership and the Naval Academy Center for Teaching and Learning. And one note, this workshop is made possible through the generous grants of the Robert and Mary Looker Foundation and the Noggle and Ingersoll families as well. The purpose of this workshop, which began last year, is to broaden the areas around the Naval Academy where ethics is taught and brought up beyond the NE 203 classroom. NE 203, the ethics for the Naval Leader course during our midshipmen's sophomore year or youngster year. The intent here is to make ethics an integral part of multiple classes across many different disciplines on the sports fields and throughout Bancroft Hall as well. As we said, this workshop is a joint endeavor with the Naval Academy Center for Teaching and Learning. I'd like to introduce Dr. Karen Sproles, the Dean of this center, to go through our learning outcomes. Dr. Sproles?
What would you like me to do, Jeff? Do you want me to read them?
Please.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. So the learning outcomes for this workshop are: 1, comprehend the basic principles and sequence of key leadership themes from USNA leadership courses. 2, comprehend the basic principles of moral reasoning as taught in USNA's NE 203 ethics course. 3, construct effective learning outcomes related to ethical content in a course, discipline, sport, or other activity. 4, develop curriculum content that integrates ethics into a course, discipline, sport, or other activity. And 5, collaborate with key influencers across the different disciplines to confront the shared challenges of incorporating ethical issues into a course, academic curriculum, discipline, sport, or other activity.
Great. Thanks very much, Doctor. Appreciate it. This is the fifth and final day of our workshop. On Monday, we began our workshop with an overview of the leadership course sequence. Dr. Doug Rao, I'd like to ask you maybe to say a few words about that, please.
Sure. Well, you saw from the very first learning outcome is to give this group an understanding of some of the things that are taught in the core courses to our midshipmen. And the midshipmen in each year that come into Luce Hall for one of the courses in leadership, ethics, or law. And so we were happy to be able to give an outline to you all on what we teach in the different courses, and also to establish some relationships here. And I was very pleased to see, as you will see in these presentations, that we want to have a continued relationship of sharing what we teach in leadership, ethics, and law with what you teach across the rest of the yard. So Jeff, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Also on Monday, we had a workshop component from Dr. Allison Webster Giddings on accreditation and ethics requirements. Allison, do you want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, certainly. Every profession is defined in part by a set of code of ethics and rules that which the members desire to follow. And so we discussed how it is that ethics become a part of our disciplines and the role that would play both in accreditation for the Naval Academy and then our specific disciplines or professions of sports and leadership.
Thanks very much. Day 2 was a day dedicated to a deep dive into the subject of ethics and how we teach it in our NE 203 course. That was led by Dr. Roger Herbert and Professor Marcus Hedall. Professor Hedall, you want to say a few words about what you did there?
Yeah, so we just focused on 3 of the main blocks of our ethics course: moral perception, and how we see the world and what inhibits our ability to see morally salient features. We spent a lot of time talking about moral deliberation, specifically the moral deliberation roadmap we use here in our ethics course at the Naval Academy. And then we talked about virtue and character as well, and how we teach that, how we talk about it, and some of the philosophical foundations for thinking about virtue and character.
Thanks very much. Day 3 on Wednesday was dedicated to learning about constructing effective learning outcomes in the cognitive domain, in the psychomotor domain, and in the affective domain. That was led by Dr. Catherine Cermak, our provost, associate provost for planning and assessment. And then also we learned about new technology, podcasting, and how the Stockdale Center's Mr. Michael Sears has brought the issue of ethics, applied ethics, to a much broader audience using podcasting. Day 4, or Thursday, was an asynchronous project work day where our participants took a project related to ethics and how they wanted to expand the study and the discussion of ethics with our midshipmen and or faculty and staff and coaches, and apply it to their job. And then today, Friday, is our presentations day. Before we turn it over to our 10 participants from across the yard, I'd like to introduce our director of the Stockdale Center, Dr. Joe Thomas. Dr. Thomas?
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, appreciate it. I just wanted to say a couple of quick acknowledgements of all the hard work that's represented in everything that's going on here. I've been here at the Naval Academy for kind of a long time, and I have to say over the span of that time, you see a lot of people come and go. You see a lot of trends come and go, concepts and things like that. There's an aspect of higher education in particular that could be faddish. There's fads that occur. But the one thing that I think makes the Naval Academy really unique is the fact that we've got our mission here kind of carved into stone in certain places. It's cast in bronze and so on, because of its simplicity and accuracy, that we're focused on the moral, mental, physical development of midshipmen, right? And when it comes to the mental and physical components of the mission, we've got really strong metrics for that. We've got Cupers and various other ways we measure that mission. We've got the PRT, we've got intercollegiate athletics that measures and the wins and losses that come with that. It's simple, it's direct. The moral mission, the moral component of all of this, is a little more abstract. And to make matters worse, what compounds this challenge is that everybody feels they own it. And I'm glad of that, right? I'm glad for that everybody feels they have a part of this. But the downside of that dynamic is that everybody owns it like nobody owns it, right? So it exists in the commandant spaces, it exists in the academic side. Athletics, of course, own a piece of this. But the problem is it's so abstract, we rarely sit down and hammer out things like this, which are learning outcomes and so on, and really making this stuff actionable. So again, I just want to acknowledge the hard work and the willingness of everybody that's at this table to jump into this conversation and make what is abstract a little bit more tangible. Everything that I saw in the practice briefs, phenomenal. I'm really looking forward to the actual briefs as we go through this. I want to also acknowledge partnering with Dean Sproles in this process. This is awesome. Partnering with the Leadership Ethics and Law Department and everything they've brought to the table. We've got some folks in Stockdale that did some really hard work for this. Ms. Sarah White pulled together all the things necessary to get folks paid. Karin Orenberg did that, but most importantly, I want to acknowledge Jeff in this process, Dr. McCrease. There's an old cliche that if you want something done right, at least you do it yourself. In the Stockdale Center, we turn that on its ear a little bit. If we want something done right, we turn it over to Dr. McCrease. And it's obvious from the sound of everything that's going on here today, and the attention to detail that he pays to all of this that we benefit from. So thanks to all of you. Great work, and I look forward to these final presentations today.
Well, thanks, Dr. Thomas. Appreciate it very much. So we're going to hear from our 10 participants here, and you'll see following along with them, their chief deliverable that they've been working on this week has been an ethics quad chart, where they'll be concentrating on 4 broad areas. They'll introduce their title, introduce themselves. They'll delineate the outcomes. Remember, one of the days of the workshop was dedicated to how do you create a learning outcome? How do you define what it is you want our midshipmen or our company officers or our senior enlisted or whoever the target audience is? What do you want them to know or be able to do at the end of whatever project it is you're working on? Secondly, down in the bottom left, a lesson plan. What type of plan? How do you intend to do that? Thirdly, up in the top right quadrant, what's the timeline? And how do you plan to assess it? What type of evidence that the student or whoever your target audience leaves behind, how do you look at that and say, I have met the learning outcomes that I have set out for them or not? And then finally, the next steps. Where do you go? Where do you go from here? We know this isn't a subject that's going to leave, that's going to end at the end of this 5-day workshop. What are the next steps? So with that, let's begin our presentations. We're going to go in alphabetical order, starting with Coach Chris Campbell from track and field. So Coach Chris, we turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Jeff. Again, my name is Chris Campbell. I'm one of 6 track and field coaches here that work for NAAA. We coach a total of about 180 athletes, men and women combined program, and I've been here for 15 seasons. My project is titled 15-Minute Virtue, and just a line on it. Sports participation can help develop good character, but that doesn't happen on its own. And so I think that through the course of the last 4 or 5 days, I've come up with a plan to kind of integrate a little bit of virtue training through track and field during downtime and practice time that we have usually on Wednesday. So I'm just kind of go through the learning outcomes. The first one is that our athletes will be able to describe the essence of selected virtues. They're going to actually pick the 3 or 4 virtues that we speak about in the fall semester and kind of get a grasp for the definition and how it maybe applies to them. We want them to recognize that a lifetime of pursuing virtues is going to help them develop their character, hopefully help them to become better leaders down the road, and ultimately be better officers out in the fleet or just in their professional careers if they decide to get out of the military. The third one would be applying their knowledge of ethical issues in sports to their own lives so that they can generalize from what happens in track and field or what happens in sport competition to other areas of lives, whether it's professional or just their personal lives. The game plan is basically to ask the group of 30 throwers that I work with from a list of virtues that we give them to choose from, what their top 3 choices are. We'll tally up the most popular ones, and then we'll address them in the fall semester, probably 3 of them. I'll have some kind of reading related to that topic. Could come from Character's Destiny, one of John McCain's book, or it could come from somebody else's source that has information about ethical decision making. And they're going to read that in advance of us discussing it at a weekly workout. The actual function of discussing it will be on Wednesday afternoon when we normally go through a recovery workout. We do a general strength circuit, which is basically a lot of physical activity for about 15 or 20 minutes. When we're done with that, we usually have essentially a chalk talk. And instead of just talking about our schedule for the next few weeks and kind of where we're headed and how we're preparing for Army, Navy competition or conference championship, I'd like to add in at that point this opportunity for 15 or 20 minutes to kind of brainstorm in small groups about the topic itself, and then see if at the end of that 15 or 20 minute period, some of our more senior personnel in the groups can kind of synthesize all the information and then share it with the big group. And from that aspect, hopefully, senior personnel, juniors and seniors, can kind of demonstrate some leadership skill and informing maybe the plebes and youngsters a little more about what our team expectations are, what ethical behavior is. I think some of the likely examples would be honor, courage, resilience, those kinds of things. And if we can talk about them for a few minutes, I think that we're going to all benefit from that. And I think that they can carry that forward. So the timeline would be, I'm going to query the group in August to find out what their interests are, and then do 1 virtue per month, September, October, and November. Again, it would be once or twice on a Wednesday afternoon during that month, and they would just have maybe 2 or 3 questions that I come up with to discuss. It may stay on that track, or they may just kind of veer off and have their own conversation. But at the end of that 15 or 20 minute period, we can get together, kind of share some information, and hopefully learn from that opportunity. I had a simple rubric designed to kind of figure out if what we're doing is effective, and essentially on a regular basis, maybe 5 to 6 times during the semester, kind of just do a kind of broad stroke evaluation of all the team members I have, whether or not they sort of understand what we're talking about, really understand what we're talking about, are able to apply what we're talking about, or if they don't get it at all. And so I just have a 3-part rubric there. And then at this point, the next steps I have are to gather some rich readings about the particular virtues that they select, prepare some simple questions for the brainstorming session, and then reevaluate it after the fall semester in those 3 months, and then try to come up with 3 new virtues for the spring semester. So just a real simple plan for a real simple coach and track and field program. I think our athletes will kind of benefit from that, and we'll test it and see. The real test will be down the road 10 years from now when they're making good decisions. But whatever I can do to help bring virtuous living to life, I'd be happy in doing that.
Thank you, Coach. Next is Dr. Amanda Click from the Nimitz Library. Dr. Click, over to you, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us to hear about our projects. We have learned a lot this week, and we're excited to share with you. I'm Amanda Click. I'm the head of research and instruction in Nimitz Library, and my project is focused, perhaps not surprisingly, on information ethics. So this project is actually designed to help the research and instruction librarians meet one of our own information literacy graduate outcomes. We have 4 of these. They are focused, some of them look more like identify and articulate an information need, or use critical reasoning to evaluate information. I'll take just a second to talk a little bit about what it means when I say information literacy. This is the curriculum that librarians teach, right? And we use that phrase a lot, so I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. When I say information literacy, what I mean basically are the skills and dispositions needed to be able to find, evaluate, and use ethically information that you need. And that looks a lot of different ways here on the yard in different disciplines, and then it will look, the skills will look different out in the fleet for a pilot or a SWO or an intelligence officer. So my project is basically 2-pronged. So the librarians have been working to do some curriculum mapping and figure out how our own learning outcomes can be worked into the broader curriculum here at the Academy. And so I came into this week with the idea that I was going to create a tutorial, a module of some sort that could be used by faculty across the yard. So it would basically teach about information ethics and related concepts. You can see the first learning outcome here. The first 2 are related to that. So my idea was to have a module, a tutorial, a video, some sort of online learning object that an English professor could use or a chemistry professor could use to teach midshipmen about research ethics, about how to cite sources properly, and about how to avoid plagiarism, that sort of thing. And then throughout our conversations this week, I realized that not only could we be pulling kind of the ethical issues into our curriculum, but perhaps we could collaborate with the LEL folks to put some of our curriculum goals into their curriculum. So I'm hoping also to work with some of the LEL faculty to develop a case study that can be used somewhere within that curriculum that focuses on these issues of information ethics, which you can see is the 3rd learning outcome here. The lesson plan is broken down into these two prongs. The tutorial, as I said, would cover what does that information ethics mean? Why should I care about this? And what are these specific skills that I need? And then the case study would be more focused on applying information ethics and these related information literacy skills in the fleet, and applying the ethical roadmap that we've learned about this week to a dilemma that would be relevant in that context. So my timeline, I won't go through that too closely. Basically, just I want to say this is probably a year-long program. None of this content exists yet. I'm starting from scratch, so giving myself a little space to work through that over between now and next summer. I will say the assessment piece of this is not, I haven't decided on that yet, because I want we'll call it a module. I want the module to work in a variety of contexts, and maybe one professor wants to just use the video and with a quiz at the end. Maybe another professor wants to have a reflective piece where the students use the content and then reflect on it. Maybe someone else wants to do a flipped classroom thing where the students do the module and then I come in and do an activity with them. So I basically want to have a buffet of assessment opportunities that can be applied in different contexts and different disciplines. So my next team is to take this, or my next step is to take this all back to the library to work with my information literacy team and collect feedback from them. I also want to identify potential partners across the yard, of which I believe there are many. It seems maybe Stockdale Center might be a real good match for helping with it, for collaborating on this module or tutorial. We've got writing issues woven in here with research and information issues. So perhaps the Writing Center, Honor Concept staff, I think there are a lot of opportunities across the yard for collaboration. And then I will start with a literature review. I'm a librarian. I'll dig into the literature. I will and use that to inform my design, and then connect with folks, officers in the fleet, to help kind of inspire content for this potential case study.
Thanks very much, Dr. Clinton. Next, we have Professor Hamed Bedouihi. Professor.
Thanks, Jeff. So my project focuses on aligning the engineering ethics assignments we have in ECE with the ethics curriculum in the IDF department. Quick background first, our department offers 2 majors accredited by ABET. There are 7 learning outcomes that our graduates have to meet. 2 of them are related to ethics. And we assess those throughout the 3 years the students have in our department using 4 ethics assignments. I'm responsible for 2 of those. I teach the courses that use 2 of those. So the first learning outcomes that I list there are related to these assignments. There's a bigger picture strategic plan that I'm going to go over in a minute. But so what I looked at here is I used the learning outcomes from ABET and from our professional society, our IEEE Code of Ethics, and I injected a lot of words and terminologies from the LEL learning outcomes. The idea here is for the students to think of this as another application of their ethics education, and not necessarily like a new thing that we're teaching them. So you see keywords like ethical dilemmas and moral reasoning that we didn't have before. The bigger strategic plan would be, instead of having 4 separate ethics assignments, it would be 1 big case study that we visit 4 times throughout the 3 years. And so that each time we visit it, it covers the ethics or the leadership course that the students are taking that year or that semester. So you see 4 learning outcomes under the strategic plan. Each one is targeting the major topic covered by the ethics or the leadership course in that year. Timeline would be to just continue to collect case studies that are covering both historic and modern cases. I would like to find ones related to cyberspace and new emerging technology as well. I would like to continue to work with the experts here in the Stockdale Center on developing a specific framework that the students can use to tackle these case studies, so that's not like open-ended questions. And for the first time, I would like to devote some class time to introduce these case studies and the framework instead of just making it a take-home assignment. We're still going to collect the answers because it's part of the assessment and accreditation requirements, but I would like also to introduce for the first time a reflective paragraph, so the students reflect on the new relationship between the 2 ethics courses. Next steps would be to try to expand this with my department chair and assessment chair to include the big strategic plan. Maybe even talk to the Dean of the School of Engineering and Weapons on even expanding it even more if they found it useful. And on an unrelated note, just exchange case studies with the folks here at LEN and the Stockdale Center. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Professor. Next is Commander Tom Flaherty, the 5th Battalion Officer. Commander, to you, please.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good morning, team. As Dr. McCree said, my name is Tom Flaherty. I'm a 5th Battalion Officer, also the Nuclear Sessions Officer here at the Naval Academy. Really appreciate being invited. I know I'm kind of the oddball in the room since I'm different in many ways. Coming from Bancroft Hall. I'm very humbled to be here. When I started the week, I came in with kind of a lofty goal, and it was, find ways to grow and develop the culture of ethical leadership and accountability at the Naval Academy inside Bancroft Hall, but collectively, inside the Brigade of Midshipmen. I realized very quickly it's a lofty goal, and all of us have a part and play in that effort. So I kind of necked it down and found a way where I think that not just me, but my fellow battalion officers can have an impact in this effort. So my project is to develop a plan, a continuous training plan for the professional development of company officers and senior enlisted leaders inside the brigade. For those of you who don't know, company officers and senior enlisted, they really have a profound impact on the Brigade of Midshipmen. That's a little different than when I went here and some of us went here, but things have changed a little bit. And anytime that anybody has a problem at the Naval Academy, whether it's in the academic area or the athletic, on the sports field, the first person you typically call is the company officer. So they have a lot on their plates, but not every company officer and senior enlisted is created equal. They all come from different backgrounds. We come from different accession sources. We come from different communities, different services. And with that just comes a plethora of experience, experience levels. Some of us came from great commands. Some of us came from commands that weren't very good. So my overall goal is to, in the short term, begin to develop the company officers and senior enlisted in ethical leadership and kind of synchronize us and get us all on the same page so that we can impact the Brigade of Midshipmen and also grow professionally in our own careers. So if you look at the learning outcomes, the first one is comprehend and internalize what it means to be an ethical leader. It's discussed, and NE 310 is a great starting point for that because that's really what we focus on in that course. And through various case studies. The second learning outcome, compose and embody a personal command philosophy through self-reflection and then studying other high-performing organizations like the All Blacks team from the book Legacy. Command philosophy is something I never really thought about until before I took command of the submarine. So I think it's a great time to work with these young company officers now to help them reflect and think about that and be more prepared than I was to step up to be department heads, executive officers, commanding officers, and beyond. And then finally, to adapt and apply principles of moral reasoning as we teach here at NE 203, and the different products that the Stockdale Center offers to aid in the company officers, senior enlisted, own professional development, and then also tangentially to influence the first class midshipmen who are going to lead us this year through a giant shifting around of midshipmen, the shotgun that we're executing, and resetting the culture in the brigade. So the lesson and strategic plan, it includes all kinds of different things: readings, discussions, case studies, podcasts from the Stockdale Center, some of the graphic novel type scenarios that we use here, and there may be an opportunity for the battalion officers to actually influence those and enhance them and make them better. As far as the timeline and assessment plan, I'm looking more short term, immediately, starting just prior to the reform of the brigade, finishing at the end of the fall semester, then reassessing, how we did and maybe where we can improve this process and then more formalize it so that we have a continuing training and development plan for company officers and senior enlisted at the academy. And then finally, in the bottom right, the next steps. It always starts with communicating. So communicating, our expectations and timelines to the company officers and senior enlisted, working with all the course leads in leadership ethics and law department and the Stockdale Center, some own individual research and studying on my own to make myself better, and looking at different high-performing organizations and figuring out ways to assimilate that into the professional development of the COs and SELs. And then finally, nothing would be sat without developing a rubric to kind of grade, how we're doing and what we can change in the future. The last thing I would say is, I learned a lot from all of you. So, the one specific area that I think I'd like to go after is using reflection amongst the company officers and senior enlisted to help with this development. Specifically, all of us go through ethical and leadership challenges every single day inside the brigade. But maybe reflecting on those and then sitting down and working together to to learn from each other and make all of us better and make the brigade better. So pending your questions, that's all I have. Thank you very much for giving me some time today, sir.
Thanks very much, Commander. Next is Mr. Joe Fondale from the Physical Education Department. Mr. Fondale.
Thank you, Dr. McCrease. Thank you to the Stockdale Center. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Fondale, Professor of Physical Discipline in the Physical Education Department and Naval Academy Athletic Association here at the Academy. I'm going to share with you a little bit about what we do for the PRT, or the Physical Readiness Test. Thanks to the Stockdale Center for allowing us to discuss and share what we do, how we do it, and to collaborate on methods of making our system better. The PRT, the Physical Readiness Test, is the most visible part of what we do throughout the year. Midshipmen take the test twice a year, each semester, but it's only possible to perform well at that game day or that test through the support structure of the whole PE department and the whole athletics programs. The physical development of the midshipmen is 1/3 of the Naval Academy's mission, as it should be, because there's just no way to extract out the physical demands of fighting and winning America's wars. The midshipmen are enrolled in one physical education class and perform the PRT each semester. And then there are additional touch points that PE and NAAA members have with the midshipmen through extracurricular activities. This highlights the fact that in PE, we have to get it right. We have an opportunity and both an obligation to do what we do and do it well. And through this workshop this week, we've developed some learning outcomes. And these are essentially ongoing instructor education. We will continue to prepare our physical education instructors to professionally and administer the PRT in a standardized manner, free of bias, while continuing to motivate midshipmen to strive for excellence and preserving the integrity of the PRT, or the integrity of the test. And this is extremely important. Ethics have to be part of our discipline. And the difficulty here for instructors is that the performer is always part of the test. The performer is always part of the performance. So how do we eliminate bias? And I think that we've done that a little bit. And side information about the Naval Academy is here. The P department is in collaboration with Naval Academy Athletics, and so that's a collaborative effort. There are different methods of doing this throughout the service academies. At West Point, it's completely separate. At the Air Force Academy, it's more like our model. But we have at the Naval Academy, we have boxing experts teaching boxing class, and we have swimming experts teaching swimming class. And not only experts in their field, but they're also experts in teaching the fundamentals. And so we feel that's a great model. Our second learning outcome is that we'd like to continue to provide exceptional execution of the physical curriculum and the testing evolutions while serving a partly rotational faculty and a partly rotational student body. So as every department here, we incorporate new faculty members into the program, but we incorporate 1/4 of the student body into our program each year, and that is a challenge because physical discipline and physical activity is uniquely military, and so we don't have that everywhere. A third learning outcome is to strengthen our culture of physical fitness among the brigade throughout the education and incorporation of that 1/4 of the student body. And according to Pentagon data released a few years ago, about only 1/3 of Americans are physically capable of serving in the military. And so we there have to develop midshipmen physically. They don't always come developed. Our strategic plan to accomplish our learning outcomes is to regularly provide training to the physical education staff on the details of administering a USNA specific PRT, because it's different than the fleet. We'll continue to provide staff education on the specific midshipman opportunities and consequences of a PRT performance and address the professional and moral obligations of administering the test in accordance to USNA protocols and collaborate standards of what is good, what does good look like. And this is important because we at the Naval Academy have adjusted the PRT different than the fleet and we've taken out some of the bias where it's more of a standard test, and the performer can be eliminated somewhat from the performance. We're going to continue to facilitate pre and post test instructor midshipmen, include the midshipmen in discussion about best practices and what works. And this is important because the test is a standard test. However, it changes depending on weather, time of year, and what's going on in the brigade. We'll continue to provide staff education, prepare instructors to professionally and ethically handle grading disputes, which is an important thing, and allow the instructor to move from instructor mode to test mode or referee mode as best we can. Our timeline and assessment plan is pretty quick. Right now, the plebes are completing plebe summer, and they are involved in this, and so we will be able to compare their pre-test and their post-test. We'll be prepared for the brigade PRT this fall, and we will compare numbers across their years here at the academy, and then we'll collect, codify, and share after-action information after that testing evolution. Our next steps, which will happen immediately, is throughout plebe summer, we'll continue to encourage a culture of physical fitness for the plebe class, and we'll encourage instructors, PE instructors, through their class to provide context of how the classes connect to the overall mission and how those classes connect to producing capable leaders for the Navy and the Marine Corps. And it's not just a class. This will be an opportunity for them at their next command to create an inclusive environment and connect with their sailors and Marines that they're leading. And then finally, through this workshop, we've identified that the Stockdale Center and the LEL program have a phenomenal pedagogical process of teaching leadership. And we want to align as best we can with the PE classes in those same and similar lessons. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Fondale. Next, we have a joint presentation from Professor Shirley Lin and Professor Jamie Schlesman from the Naval Academy Chemistry Department. Professor Lin, first to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone at Stockdale Center, all the workshop facilitators for this experience. So I've been working with Jamie Schlesman, who is the chair of our ethics working group in our department, and the other members of the ethics working group, to include Professor Wes Farrow, who came to this workshop last. So he's also done some work. I just want to say that compared to other areas of our curriculum in chemistry, teaching ethics, we're really at the very beginning of our journey. It's not that we do zero, but we're still coming to grips with what we want that curriculum to look like and to develop it. So if we go to the next slide, our project here reflects our desire to use our certifying body, the American Chemical Society, that certifies our Bachelor's of Science degree, and their Professional Chemist Code of Conduct, which exists for all ACS members and ACS affiliates, to create a curriculum map that will allow us to talk about USNA attributes, LEL concepts and content in their courses, and then decide where we want to cover each of those topics from each element of the code within the chemistry major. If you could go to the next slide, please. So we have learning outcomes here. These are written to reflect what we'd like to achieve at the end of the chemistry major across all 6 semesters. So that's not for a specific activity, but this is overall how our graduates will be able to function after they receive their degree. So we would like for them to know what the elements of the Professional Chemist Code are. There are 9 elements, to articulate the parallels between this code and the curriculum of LEL, to distinguish between issues of scientific integrity and true moral dilemmas or deliberations, and then to be able to analyze situations that occur in chemistry where ethical decision-making is relevant, and hopefully utilize both the Chemist Code of Conduct in parallel with the moral deliberation roadmap that's taught in N203. So if you go to the next slide, Jamie and I worked together to create this strategic plan and draft curriculum map, and it's too large to show here. I'm just showing here one line from that map. So on the left, you see one of the elements of the Chemist Code, and then the second column there is what LEL courses have content relevant to that code, and then concepts that are covered, graduate attributes, and finally on the right-handmost column, which courses we believe might be the appropriate ones to cover this content. So this particular example has to do with a code element where not only are chemists expected to not engage in misconduct, but they are also responsible to not allow others in the community to engage in misconduct. And we found that there are parallels in the NE 203 and NL 310 curriculum, concepts of courage, organizational climate, culture, and values. And then in terms of attributes, courageous and honorable came to mind. And finally, these are fundamental concepts that we would like to have appear early in our major. And so we selected the 2 courses that are in the fall of the 3rd class year, organic chemistry and the first integrated lab, to have this discussion take place. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we look at the timeline, we are going to cover this curriculum across 6 semesters, and the activities that we are thinking about creating, not all of them exist yet, are readings followed by small group discussions. We could also be doing case studies, and similar to some of the LEL courses, role-playing scenarios could be quite powerful. And in terms of assessment, since we don't have all the activities set in stone already, the variety exists of using questions on exams or short essay. And then we are thinking of having a capstone experience in the spring of the 1st class year, in which case there could be a paper or a presentation. Next slide. Okay, finally, our next steps. This is still a plan in progress. It's nascent. We would like to work more with the lead faculty and look at our map together and refine it. Also, we need to talk to all the stakeholders within chemistry, to include the leaders of our curriculum, instruction, and our assessment, as well as our faculty and staff. And then we envision this next year to start coming up with these new activities and base it around the professional chemist code. And then finally, if we can have the time, pilot some new activities with small groups of majors so that we can get some assessment data and then also use that to refine and improve the materials we're creating. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Part 2 of this chemistry duo is Professor Jamie Schlesman.
Thank you, Dr. McCree. Thank you to the Stockdale Center and all the facilitators and participants this week. And as you heard, I've been involved in developing the larger project that Professor Lin just told you about. And what I'm going to tell you about next is what we see as a pilot activity to support this larger project. So this goal is to have redesigned and a recently developed seminar activity in research ethics that we have executed in our research seminar course for our first UPenn majors. And the revision, the redesign is to help to align our terminology and our outcome goals with USNA LEL curriculum. And just to tell you a little bit about that course, it's SC 472 is a spring firstie seminar course for our majors who are in their 6th and final semester with us. And these midshipmen are typically in their 1st or 2nd semester of research or capstone lab-based experiences where they're working hard in experimental design, data acquisition, and data analysis and interpretation. And we want to layer onto that knowledge and those experiences information that will come perhaps after they graduate for many of them. And that is the peer-reviewed publication of their experimental results and also the external grant acquisition efforts that are needed to support those research efforts. And so one of our learning outcomes is to list that sequence of events that occurs for both publication and external funding. And Shirley mentioned the ACS Professional Chemist Code of Conduct. And so we want to incorporate elements of that code in this activity. And really for me, the heart of that is for the midshipmen to see themselves as professional chemists and to align with that, the parallels as they emerge as naval officers. In addition, we will ask them to learn to distinguish between moral dilemmas and tests of integrity in scenarios involving these peer-reviewed processes of publication and grant proposal review, and how that might impact decisions made in mentoring research personnel and planning research programs. And to accomplish that, we would ask that they would apply LEL's moral deliberation roadmap to a research-based case study. So this has been designed and is now in redevelopment as a 50-minute seminar activity in the SC 472 chemistry seminar course. So prior to that activity day, midshipmen would receive a copy of the code of conduct and a case study to read through before coming to seminar. And at the start of the activity, facilitators would introduce some hopefully tempting historical and current event ripped from the headlines, ethical vignettes to whet the students' interest in this subject, as well as giving a brief overview of the peer-reviewed processes for publication of articles and external funding acquisition, and to review the elements of the ACS Code of Conduct, and to review the moral deliberation roadmap itself, just to help them orient, put all of those manifold pieces together. And then the midshipmen would divide into small groups to apply that moral deliberation roadmap, to analyze the case study, to discuss nuanced leading questions, and to be able to evaluate I should say that in the case study we've used so far, there is a principal investigator. This is a professor and research group leader in chemistry who has received a manuscript to review for peer review. And from this activity, he gained some information that may have particular value to his own research program. And so the leading questions have to do with the decisions that he would make to utilize or not, and how to utilize that information. And so then midshipmen would present out to the larger class their findings about the lead characters' actions and possible next steps. And then we'd ask midshipmen to provide a written copy of their analyses. The details of the nature of that writing we're still thinking about. For the timeline and assessment this fall, we would revise the existing presentation in collaboration with our department chair, the Chemistry Ethics Working Group, as well as members of the LEL community in the Stockdale Center. And we execute the revised seminar activity next February, collect midshipmen work, collect feedback from midshipmen and facilitators, and in the end, of course, evaluation. Next steps would be to summarize that feedback, work with our curriculum instruction and assessment chairs and department chair, revise as needed to better our product, and then to adapt this practice for additional studies, additional activities that could help to support other elements of the CS Code of Conduct and enhance our curriculum. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Professor. Appreciate it. Our next presentation comes from Coach Jim McNeil from the sprint football team. Coach, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. Really excited to be here. I'm an 86 grad, and my project is Ethics on the Field, How Do We Win? And this came about in my mind. I was at a coaching clinic, and they were talking about the fact that there's been several studies that the longer an athlete is in competitive sports, it has a inversely proportional drop in their ethics. So at the Naval Academy, that's obviously a problem. And as in a unique role that I have here as an adjunct professor teaching ethics, youngster ethics, NE 203, and as a sprint football coach, it got me to thinking, about how I coach on the field and how my players play. And so I wanted to dig into that topic here at this workshop. And so what I've decided to do is have a meeting with my players before the season and really talk about some different concepts. One is the difference between sportsmanship and gamesmanship. And sportsmanship is the honorable pursuit of victory. Gamesmanship, for those old Oakland Raider fans, Al Davis, just win, baby, right? And there's a difference between the two. And it ties back, that specific concept ties back to NE 203. We spend the last 2 to 3 weeks of our course talking about just war theory and how we fight our nation's war, but do it in an honorable way. And so that has a direct correlation to the difference between winning the right way and winning the wrong way. The second learning outcome is really distinguish between ethical and unethical behaviors on the field. That is also ties right back to NE 203, where we talk about the difference between deception and perfidy. Deception being trying to trick someone within the context of the rules, perfidy being using an opponent's adherence to the rules to trick them, which is an unethical way to do it. And then the last learning outcome would be judge ethical and moral obligations in practice and game situations, and really focus on how are we habituating those behaviors. As a football coach, any football coach I think would say that you want your players to play fast, and you can't play fast when you're thinking. So that's what practice is about, is taking all those little skill sets and trying to make them so much muscle memory and much instinct that they're able just to compete. And that can be very positive if they're successful, but if we are reinforcing the wrong behaviors, those will also come out in a game time scenario too. So as far as my strategic plan, as I mentioned, I want to get my team together and talk about this concept. I want to have some questions so that I can drive the dialogue, but I really want the players and my young coaches to be the ones that are kind of talking about it. And I really want to empower, for those that don't know, sprint football, most of our coaches are recently graduated ensigns and second lieutenants. So I want them to drive it, and I want our first class midshipmen who are going to be graduating in less than a year, I want them to drive this. And then for our post-season meeting, how is this season different than anything else they've been? Again, if you're playing this at this level, at the college level, this is typically not your first season. You've been playing, all your life. So was this season any different? Examining it from this outcome. So how I'm going to do that? Do it from a qualitative standpoint. Lead a discussion. Quantitatively, it'd be difficult. We probably have 80 plus folks in the room. So I want to do it from a qualitative standpoint. At the conclusion of the season, look at our penalties is a good way to look at it. How were those? Were those from an ethical, were they mistakes, or were there something that was against the rules? And then at the end of the season, talk about that. Hey, here were some situations, go over it. And again, record the session and try to do it from a qualitative standpoint and try to find out where they're coming from on that and see if we've made some progress. Next step, brief the head coach, get it on the calendar. And unlike a lot of the projects here, I should be able to, this should be done with our season, and I should be able to have some results.
Thanks very much, Coach. Our next presentation is Commander Aaron Meehan from the Naval Academy's English Department. Commander?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Erin Meehan, Associate Chair of the English Department, and my project this week is Ethics in Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is a subgenre of science fiction. I think it's best viewed as a computer-saturated science fiction. So you can see right away how it meets the moment here at the Academy for the midshipmen. However, 2 years ago, I started developing a course with cyber science called Cyberpunk, and we delivered it successfully in the spring of last academic year. Giving that course, it's clear to see that there's a lot of room to maneuver for ethical considerations, and cyberpunk is a great genre to use to discuss ethics. So this week has been really beneficial in kind of teasing out the ways we can incorporate not only cyber science, but also what's done here in LEL when we talk about cyberpunk literature. For context, the English department teaches core curriculum both in the fall and the spring, so we see all plebes both times, and then we also open all of our upper level courses to non-majors. So we see between 1,500 and 1,800 students every semester. We teach across several genres, Cyberpunk is increasing, though, in a lot of our faculty's interests. The learning outcomes, if we could just start there, it's very important to us to use consistent language in our classrooms. We see our classrooms as being an extension of other classrooms where we have more space for discussion and dialogue, whereas you might not have that time in the chemistry lab to carry on some ethical discussion. We do have those opportunities at times using literature that's helpful and complementary. The second, third, and fourth learning outcomes are pretty normal English literature learning outcomes. However, you could see that I've boosted them a little with what we've learned this week. So when we talk about our own assumptions or others' assumptions in the classroom, perhaps having the students really do it from that ethical position. The third one is pretty exciting, actually. In all of our English classes, we really focus on helping the midshipmen learn how to think, not what to think, and they have to provide evidence for their arguments. So using ethical dilemmas, tests of integrity, or moral injury from cyberpunk literature helps enable that discussion and teaches them how to use that evidence. The fourth learning outcome I have there is really using the cyberpunk text and core cyber thought to draw out more complex inferences from the cyberpunk authors. Now, what's in mind there is really using a lot of what they learn in LEL to make their arguments again. The fifth one is I built this based on this week's discussions, but I also think it's very relevant. Midshipmen today are going to graduate and immediately enter a cyber fight. It will be unavoidable and escapable regardless of what they choose for service selection or given for service selection. So embodying and ethically examined cyberspace existence, I think, is appropriate in our classroom learning objectives. If you move down into our lesson and strategic plan, these are just some examples really of how a semester would flow, and they've been augmented with things we've learned this week. In all of our classes, we do a lot of writing, we do a lot of presenting and close reading. I'd like to just highlight a couple of these. I do a creative writing assignment. I did it successfully in Cyberpunk as well. I do it in Literature of War, where students have to write short fiction pieces about future war. Within those short fiction pieces, they have to have an artificial character. So you can see in number 3 here that I've changed it a little bit, where their fictional piece has to have artificial protagonists who are actually confronted with moral dilemmas. And I also have in there ROM versus RAM. That's a nod to different types of memory, how it actually is navigated when we're building artificial intelligence and machine learning devices. So the effort there is really to help them frame their own, visualization of this invisible space, and then how they're going to interact in cyberspace as well as with machines or artificial characters. I also changed the research portion to not only discuss privacy and surveillance. Naturally, when you talk about privacy and surveillance in cyberspace, you would be confronted immediately with ethical issues, dilemmas. So to actually specify that into machine thought, the ethics of machine thought for that research piece, I think is important. If you're talking about privacy and surveillance, if you're in uniform, you immediately gravitate to lethality. I use the phrasing lethality boundaries. And so poetry allows us to really explore what lethality boundaries are, believe it or not. And cyberpunk is a great genre to use for this, because it really is difficult to conceptualize something that's not just a robot that you're reading in science fiction. So this is that added layer of sophistication, I think, with how they process this setting and the imagery. For the timeline and assessment plan, I have a simple box around what I think is achievable in the near term. Simply adding to what we do in our core curriculum. We also offer a literature of the sciences course. And when I say adding to, I don't mean mandating cyberpunk whatsoever. We offer mini brown bags, and we help each other out within the department with ideas on how to teach what to teach. And if you just look down at the next steps, you can see that we always invite our colleagues to join us and make us better and share what we do in the classroom. but make it pretty deliberate that we invite Stockdale Center and then also the LEL instructors to come brown bag with us so that we can discuss in more depth how we can frame ethics in our classrooms. In the long term, we are the beneficiaries of the Brady family's generosity. Every year we host the Brady series, which is focused on our plebe classes. I would like to nominate a cyberpunk artist for the Brady series in a few years and have that actually considered by the committee. We'd like to formally continue our partnership with Cyber Science. They've been fantastic, super helpful in many regards. And then I think a formal assessment could begin at its earliest in academic year 25 if we are specifically referring to ethics and cyberpunk and how it's used in our classrooms. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Commander Meehan. Before we introduce our final presentation here, we're going to have a few minutes for questions and answers at the end. We'd ask anyone out in the viewing audience, if you'd like to pose a question, to do it via the chat function or use the hand raise function in Google Meets. Our final presentation today is from Professor Sylvia Peart from the Languages and Cultures Department. Please, Professor Peart.
Thank you, everyone here at the Stockdale Center, and thank you to everyone, my colleagues here. I'm Professor Sylvia Peart from Languages and Cultures, and my project is Character Development and Moral Deliberation in the Spanish Classroom. So as professors, we want our students to be reflective and critically engage with the content we present them, and we also expect that they will apply that new acquired knowledge and connect it to other disciplines and also to their future profession. So I hope that this project can help me achieve those objectives. And I'm using structured critical reflections to do that as a tool. In my field, structured critical reflection has shown to deepen students' understanding of the world. These writing assignments can alter students' frames of reference. Through these assignments, students can connect their language learner with other areas, other educational, personal experience, and they can connect the target culture that we're teaching to their own culture. And with this project, I'm targeting 4 specific USNA attributes: inclusive, resilient, adaptable, and innovative. And the course where I'm working on this pedagogical intervention is FS 412, Latin American Cultures. The course has 7 units, and here what I will do is present just 1 unit and what I'm doing with that specific unit. In Unit 2, we focus on colonization and colonial political social organizations in Latin America. And in order to do that, I introduced this painting. And if you can scroll down, Jeff, everybody can see the painting. And it depicts the caste system during colonial times. We read some sources of the time, and then we focus on a case study on Mexico, how this caste system impacted Mexico and how it's still impacted it today. And in order to do that, I introduce an article, and if you scroll down, I can show an image. The article is called, you have the title in Spanish there, The Racism That Mexico Does Not Want to See, is from El País. And the article also has a testimony of this actor, a Mexican actor called Tenoch Huerta. And he has indigenous heritage, and he tells some of his stories of the barriers that he had to overcome as a kid in school, and then as an adult in the television world, where he has been typecast. And many directors have told him that he cannot be el galán de las telenovelas, the protagonist of the telenovelas, because he doesn't look like one, basically. So we can go back to the beginning now. So we analyze and discuss several multimedia sources. And at the end of this chapter, this unit, I give students a reflective piece for them to write. And you have the reflective piece written there in Spanish. And I'm asking students to draw from what they have learned in the unit on race and racism in Mexico and colonial times. So I'm focusing on the target culture here. What they have experienced last summer in our country as a result of George Floyd's death, So here I'm focusing on the home culture and the events that happen in our country. And the last piece of this reflection is what can you do as a leader in the brigade to create a more inclusive environment? And what I'm focusing there is the immediate environment and their profession. So I will focus a little bit now on the learning outcomes, and you can see I mapped out the attributes to the learning outcomes. Some of these are very specific to analyze and critically analyze and organize information, but there's one specific that I focus on this workshop, and that is reflect critically on character development and moral deliberation regarding the target and the target and home culture. So the idea is to be able to focus on character development on some of these reflections, but also moral deliberation. In terms of timeline and assessment plan, I teach and coordinate this course every spring. So my idea is to reframe some of the reflections that I have for this course in the next spring. And I use a rubric to assess students in their writing. And I also use a survey. So I have a direct and indirect evidence to assess this course. And I'm hoping that the survey will help me capture the affective domain. And finally, for next steps, besides revising some of these aspects, I would like to present my results at the CTL conference and hopefully publish an academic paper based on my findings. And I do have IRB approval to do that. Thank you.
Professor, thanks very much. Well, we have a few minutes for any comments or questions that our guests may have, either assembled here in the room or out in the electronic viewing audience. If you would please use the hand function or the chat function to pose those questions. Okay, Mr. Vossen, please, the floor is yours. I'll pose the question here. Mr. Vossen asks, in the beginning of this session, Dr. Thomas referred to fads in academia. Great work by all the presenters in developing pilot programs. Do you, the group here, think that these will be fads, or will ethics across the curriculum in the yard stick and even grow during the next 10 years? What can leadership do to support this effort? Anybody want to take that on? Coach McNeil, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Thoughts?
Yeah, so, I had on my notes that, NE 203 should not be a standalone course. And I'll just give you, an anecdotal answer. So I'm doing a couple of honor remediations right now. And one of my midshipmen that I'm honor remediating, I asked him who he had for NE 203, and he couldn't remember. So I'm not sure what that means, other than the fact that he didn't really take on board what we were trying to do. So on one hand, we can't, say that the instructor didn't do what they were supposed to do, because this is a midshipman and they're responsible for the material. But I do think that NE 203 and ethics, they take the class and then they move on, and we don't. I asked my cohorts here, have you heard the MDR? Heard of the moral deliberation roadmap before you had this class? Is that being talked about? Is moral reasoning being talked about in the hall? Or is it, oh yeah, I vaguely remember that from NE 203. So as far as what can leadership do to support this effort, is take the specific things that these youngsters are learning in NE 203 and make that part of the vocabulary and the culture of the Naval Academy, both in the classroom, in the hall, sports teams like what I'm trying to do, so that it's the base of it's the foundation, but it's continually being reinforced. Because if we don't do that, then there's really no, and really no reason to teach the course, because part of what we talk about in NE 203 is building muscle memory and learning how to make moral decisions. And we present some very difficult decisions that I tell my students, I hope you never have to face a tough decision like this, but you're going to face other decisions, and you got to practice making those difficult decisions. And if that's not reinforced by the leadership and in the hall, then really if you don't work out, if you don't work that muscle, it's going to atrophy.
Yeah. Tom, if I could maybe put you on the spot here, the purpose for this whole workshop is to try to broaden ethics beyond NE 203, one simple academic course, and implement it all across the yard in the academic department through different classes, in Bancroft Hall, through whichever ways you guys decide to move, and on the sports field. So you seem to narrow in on the SELs and the company officers. Can you explain how you think that focus on SELs and company officers might trickle down into the midshipmen's exposure?
Yeah, the company officers and the senior enlisted. I just think they have a profound impact on all of the midshipmen in Bancroft Hall. And again, I say this based on my going here and listening to others who graduated from the Naval Academy. It was much different when I went here. I don't even know who my company officer was. I certainly don't know who my battalion officer was, nor do I probably want to, because I would have been in trouble. But things have changed. The midshipmen are different today than they were 21 years ago when I graduated. Midshipmen are high performing, involved in so many different activities. I would say overextended at times, just based on my observation. They crave feedback, they crave mentoring, they crave interaction with senior officers. And a company officer is kind of that bridge, I think, and senior enlisted. They're kind of a bridge between a midshipman and then, going to a more senior 06 or an admiral or a senior coach or a professor. So they really have a profound, I think a company officer is kind of like a division officer on a ship or a submarine or in any units, where the sailors are more comfortable coming to them. And they're really impacted a lot by that officer who's only separated by maybe, a few years rather than 20 years. So I think that's where, I don't think this is a fad. It can't be a fad or we're going to be in trouble in the military. So I think there's an opportunity to grow and develop the company officers and senior enlisted so that when they're approached by midshipmen who crave that engagement and that mentoring, that they're speaking the same language as all of us, that they're communicating the right messages and the right lessons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sure does. Professor Shirley Lynn, you're one of our professors here from the academic side. Over to you, please.
Yeah, so I'll try to address both questions. I think there's a lot of hope that this is not a fad, and Allison did a lovely presentation on Monday about how professional societies and professional organizations are building ethics into their accreditation and the material that they provide to departments as they execute programs and majors. So I definitely think there's a lot of room to grow, and I think that the sorts of ethics that we see from those professional societies is going to hopefully mirror the times we're in. So, for instance, in chemistry, attention and care for the environment wasn't always one of our codes of conduct, and it is now. Right? It used to be dilution is the solution. If you just dump it into the river, that takes care of the problem. Right? So we're evolving, and what's also true is that I would venture to say Jamie and I are pretty much the same age. That when we were students, a lot of the ethics training was about scientific integrity and misconduct. And now what we're seeing in our professional code are aspects about how we treat other people, dignity and respect, inclusion, knowing about your biases. So this evolution, I think, is really important and hopeful. In terms of what leadership can do to support this effort, it'll come as no surprise, resources. And I think resources, especially in terms of faculty time, staff time to develop these materials, to think, this week has been a gift for us to think together about how to support this part of the mission. And I know resources are always scarce and difficult to come by. Things like money in the summers for people to do curriculum development, I know it hasn't always come easily, but a return to some of that. And also, thanks to all the gifts and the generous donors to the Stockdale Center for giving us these opportunities. If we can keep that coming, I think that will really help us.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Professor. Well, we're nearing the end of our allotted time. Superintendent Sean Buck, I see you've tuned in here. Sir, do you have anything to add to close the session today?
First, to you all in the Stockdale Center, I'd like to commend you for continuing this program of encouraging ethics across our entire Naval Academy family. I think you all have heard it when we ask the question, who's in charge of the moral development of a midshipman? And the answer should be and is all of us, every single one of us. No matter what aspect of the time of day you get to interact with a midshipman. And that's either leading by example by your own ethical behavior, or actually engaging like you all have just outlined in the project that you had from this course. So one, Stockdale Center, thank you for doing it. To each of you all who were invited to attend, and you attended, you gave your time and you actually cared and you engaged and leaned into it. Thank you. Listening to all of your proposed plans, I found that very exciting across all the different disciplines, and I like the effort you put into it. Now, what I would task all of you all is, hey, you just put that on a PowerPoint slide. Now do it. If you don't do what you just said, then you just wasted your time, you wasted our time, and you actually will not be part of the solution moving forward. But if you do what you put on that PowerPoint slide and that format, it's very, very exciting. And I commend your thought, and I hope in the future to commend your actions. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks very much, Admiral. We appreciate it. And again, thanks to our donors who made this possible, the Robert and Marion Looker Foundation and the Noggle and Ingersoll families. And on behalf of the Naval Academy Center for Teaching and Learning and the Naval Academy's Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership, we appreciate our participants here in the room who took part this week. We appreciate all of our facilitators who dedicated their summer time and energies toward that. And we appreciate anyone who's watching either here in real time or those people who may be watching later as this whole series of this week's proceedings are posted on the stockdalecenter.com website. So I'm Jeff McCrease. I'm the Deputy Director of the Stockdale Center. We appreciate your interest and your participation, and we look forward to seeing you next year at the 2022 Ethics Across the Curriculum and the Yard workshop. Thanks very much.